him to the Angara, urged him to put this plan in execution. Indeed, it was necessary to act without delay. The Russian troops from the government of Yakutsk were advancing towards Irkutsk. They had concentrated along the upper course of the Lena. In 6 days they would arrive. Therefore, before 6 days had passed, Irkutsk must be betrayed. Ogareff hesitated no longer. One evening, the 2nd of October, a council of war was held in the grand saloon of the palace of the governor general. This palace, standing at the end of Bolchaia Street, overlooked the river. From its windows could be seen the camp of the Tartars, and had the invaders possessed guns of wider range, they would have rendered the palace uninhabitable. The Grand Duke, General Voranzoff, the governor of the town, and the chief of the merchants, with several officers, had collected to determine upon various proposals. "Gentlemen," said the Grand Duke, "you know our situation exactly. I have the firm hope that we shall be able to hold out until the arrival of the Yakutsk troops. We shall then be able to drive off these barbarian hordes, and it will not be my fault if they do not pay dearly for this invasion of the Muscovite territory." "Your Highness knows that all the population of Irkutsk may be relied on," said General Voranzoff. "Yes, General," replied the Grand Duke, "and I do justice to their patriotism. Thanks to God, they have not yet been subjected to the horrors of epidemic and famine, and I have reason to hope that they will escape them. But I cannot admire their courage on the ramparts enough. You hear my words, Sir Merchant, and I beg you to repeat such to them." "I thank your Highness in the name of the town," answered the merchant chief. "May I ask you what is the most distant date when we may expect the relieving army?" 6 days at most, sir," replied the Grand Duke. "A brave and clever messenger managed this morning to get into the town, and he told me that 50,000 Russians under General Kisselef are advancing by forced marches. 2 days ago they were on the banks of the Lena, at Kerensк, and now neither frost nor snow will keep them back. 50,000 good men, taking the Tartars on the flank, will soon set us free." "I will add," said the chief of the merchants, "that we shall be ready to execute your orders any day that your Highness may command a sortie." "Good, sir," replied the Grand Duke. "Wait till the heads of the relieving columns appear on the heights, and we will speedily crush these invaders." Then, turning to General Voranzoff, "Tomorrow," said he, "we will visit the works on the right bank. Ice is drifting down the Angara, which will not be long in freezing, and in that case the Tartars might perhaps cross." "Will your Highness allow me to make an observation?" said the chief of the merchants. "Do so, sir." "I have more than once seen the temperature fall to 30 and 40 degrees below zero, and the Angara has still carried down drifting ice without entirely freezing. This is, no doubt, owing to the swiftness of its current. If therefore the Tartars have no other means of crossing the river, I can assure your Highness that they will not enter Irkutsk in that way." The governor general confirmed this assertion. "It is a fortunate circumstance," responded the Grand Duke. "Nevertheless, we must hold ourselves ready for any emergency." He then, turning towards the head of the police, asked, "Have you nothing to say to me, sir?" "I have, your Highness," answered the head of police, "a petition which is addressed to you through me." "Addressed by whom?" "By the Siberian exiles, whom, as your Highness knows, are in the town to the number of 500. The political exiles, distributed over the province, had been collected in Irkutsk, from the beginning of the invasion. They had obeyed the order to rally in the town, and leave the villages where they exercised their different professions, some doctors, some professors, either at the gymnasium, or at the Japanese school, or at the school of navigation. The Grand Duke, trusting like the Czar in their patriotism, had armed them, and they had thoroughly proved their bravery. "What do the exiles ask?" said the Grand Duke. "They ask the consent of your Highness," answered the head of police, "to their forming a special corps, and being placed in the front of the first sortie." "Yes," replied the Grand Duke, with an emotion which he did not seek to hide, "these exiles are Russians, and it is their right to fight for their country." "I believe I may assure your Highness," said the governor general, "you will have no better soldiers." "But they must have a chief," said the Grand Duke. "Who will he be?" "They wish to recommend to your Highness," said the head of police, "one of their number, who has distinguished himself on several occasions. Is he a Russian?" "Yes, a Russian from the Baltic provinces." "His name?" "Is Wassili Fedor." This exile was Nadia's father. Wassili Fedor, as we have already said, followed his profession of a medical man in Irkutsk. He was clever and charitable, and also possessed the greatest courage and most sincere patriotism. All the time which he did not devote to the sick he employed in organizing the defense. It was he who had united his companions in exile in the common cause. The exiles, till then mingled with the population, had behaved in such a way as to draw on themselves the attention of the Grand Duke. In several sorties they had paid with their blood their debt to Holy Russia, holy as they believe and adored by her children. Wassili Fedor had behaved heroically, his name had been mentioned several times, but he never asked either thanks or favors, and when the exiles of Irkutsk thought of forming themselves into a special corps, he was ignorant of their intention of choosing him for their captain. When the head of police mentioned this name, the Grand Duke answered that it was not unknown to him. "Indeed," remarked General Voranzoff, "Wassili Fedor is a man of worth and courage. His influence over his companions has always been very great." "How long has he been at Irkutsk?" asked the duke. "For 2 years." "And his conduct?" "His conduct," answered the head of police, "is that of a man obedient to the special laws which govern him." "General," said the Grand Duke, "General, be good enough to present him to me immediately." The orders of the Grand Duke were obeyed, and before half an hour had passed Fedor was introduced into his presence. He was a man over 40, tall, of a stern and sad countenance. One felt that his whole life was summed up in a single word strife. He had striven and suffered. His features bore a marked resemblance to those of his daughter, Nadia Fedor. This Tartar invasion had severely wounded him in his tenderest affections, and ruined the hope of the father, exiled 8,000 versts from his native town. A letter had apprised him of the death of his wife, and at the same time of the departure of his daughter, who had obtained from the government an authorization to join him at Irkutsk. Nadia must have left Riga on the 10th of July. The invasion had begun on the 15th of July. If at that time Nadia had passed the frontier, what could have become of her in the midst of the invaders? The anxiety of the unhappy father may be supposed when, from that time, he had no further news of his daughter. Wassili Fedor entered the presence of the Grand Duke, bowed, and waited to be questioned. "Wassili Fedor," said the Grand Duke, "your companions in exile have asked to be allowed to form a select corps. They are not ignorant that in this corps they must make up their minds to be killed to the last man?" "They are not ignorant of it," replied Fedor. "They wish to have you for their captain." "I, your Highness?" "Do you consent to be placed at their head?" "Yes, if it is for the good of Russia." "Captain Fedor," said the Grand Duke, "you are no longer an exile." "Thanks, your Highness. But can I command those who are so still?" "They are so no longer." The brother of the Czar had granted a pardon to all Fedor's companions in exile, now his companions in arms. Wassili Fedor wrung, with emotion, the hand which the Grand Duke held out to him, and retired. The latter turned to his officers. "The Czar will not refuse to ratify that pardon," said he, smiling. "We need heroes to defend the capital of Siberia, and I have just made some." This pardon, so generously accorded to the exiles of Irkutsk, was indeed an act of real justice and sound policy. It was now night. Through the windows of the palace burned the fires of the Tartar camp, flickering beyond the Angara. Down the river drifted numerous blocks of ice, some of which stuck on the piles of the old bridges, others were swept along by the current with great rapidity. It was evident, as the merchant had observed, that it would be very difficult for the Angara to freeze all over. The defenders of Irkutsk had not to dread being attacked on that side. 10 o'clock had just struck. The Grand Duke was about to dismiss his officers and retire to his apartments, when a tumult was heard outside the palace. Almost immediately the door was thrown open, an aide de camp appeared, and advanced rapidly towards the Grand Duke. "Your Highness," said he, "a courier from the Czar!" Book 2, Chapter 12.